Pickle Bar, led by the Barrels and the Dills, indeed second to none. Sean, welcome. I know you don't do a lot of these, and we really appreciate the fact you gave us some of your time today.
Of course. Sorry I missed the call the first time. I was had the phone on the charger watching some golf. Scotty Scheffler hold out number one, and I got excited. So, I just running a little behind because of it.
Well, that's okay, because Schauffele is 62. Are you kidding me? Wow.
Unbelievable. As you know, Nate Bauer and I are going to play tomorrow morning. And, one of us might get to 62 on the front. So, can't wait.
Okay, it should be great. Should be pointed out that the owner of the station, Roger Haddon, is a huge Washington Commanders fan. So you are not alone, just so you know.
Tortured Soul Society, yes. That's good to know. I think it's probably a little bit easier to follow now that Dan Snyder's out, but hey, I grew up with it. I'm trying to afflict my kids with it as well. It hasn't taken to them yet, but we'll get there at some point.
A busy weekend coming up because Penn State's going to get some top guys coming in, but then the series of official visits kicks into high gear starting the weekend of the 31st. So where do things stand right now with the official visits and guys coming in to see Penn State?
Yeah, they're very big right now. That's we've just been playing the waiting game for almost 2 months now. It just seems like we just we're going to get to the end of May. We're going to get to June. We're going to get there, and then things are going to happen. Penn State's class about halfway full right now, but you're going to look at the next couple months as pivotal in terms of filling up. Because if you look at how Penn State has typically done their recruiting, they're for the most part they lock up shop by the time the season rolls around. I think part of that's by design, part of that's just the calendar and how it's worked out with these official visits. But they're going to start this weekend. Yosei Epinesa, the younger brother of AJ Epinesa, who played at Iowa, was a fantastic player for the Hawkeyes with the Bills right now. He's going to come in as more of a victim of circumstance there with his calendar. He's got 4 official visits scheduled in June, so he'll be in this weekend, and then it's every weekend from there on out, May 31st, June 7th, June 14th, June 21st. And then the dead period comes in. That's when they kick into overtime. That's when they kick into camp season. I think that's when, this class can sort of catch its stride. It's been all over the place, very early commitments in some spots. They've got 9 commitments on the offensive side of the ball right now, 4 on defense. So you can bet that defensive staff is probably going to catch up some here in the next 6 weeks.
Now, on the offensive side, Danny O'Brien and Andy Koltonicki have gone out. They've looked at a lot of quarterbacks themselves individually, haven't they?
Yes, they've been out on the road. Of course, Danny replacing Jaywan Sider on the road as Jaywan works his way back from an off-season injury that we don't talk about. But yeah, Danny's been out. Andy's been out. It's been mostly forward-focused, 2026. They've got a commitment from Beckham Critson, 2025. Missed out on Matt Zollers in state in 2025. So still trying to poke around there. He committed to Missouri in the spring, so they're still trying to keep an eye on him in state. But for the most part, they seem pretty content with Beckham Critson, who's now at Miami Central in Florida.
All right. Now, the early signing period, as we know, has been moved up in December. When you look at the early signing period, and I take this from a basketball point of view, they've been doing theirs the second Wednesday of November now for decades, and it's worked out fine. Where should they put the early signing period, in your opinion, as somebody who follows it as closely as you do?
I really like the end of July. Obviously, everyone's getting ready for their season, so it's not just the college coaches that are doing it; it's the kids that are doing it. And by and large, when you follow and cover Penn State, most of the kids who are in early, they stay with Penn State. I don't know if it's just a personality thing or just how the two sides sort of mesh together. But Penn State, the way that they had 1 decommitment last cycle. I think they've had 2 this cycle in the 2025 early. But, considering what that's up against nationally, Penn State's got a pretty good retention rate in terms of their guys. So I think it would probably benefit Penn State a lot if they had a signing period at the end of July. And the issue there is, and the same thing happened with, when they started in December, is if you don't sign in July, what's that do? Like if you feel that, and I know there's verbiage for coaching changes and things like that, but if you feel like you're not completely locked in and you want to go see a game at Alabama, you want to go see a game at Georgia or whatever like that, and they're still recruiting you, how does that happen? It hasn't been a big issue in December because every side has adjusted, but it's just something to put in the back of the mind. But I think from a Penn State perspective and from a high school athlete perspective, getting all that out of the way, not having to worry about injuries, not having to worry about any of that other stuff, I think that end of July probably makes a lot of sense. Now, the flip side there is, does it really matter that much anymore? Because you can arrive in January and you can hit the portal in April. It's not a situation where you are completely bound to anything really anymore. So that letter of intent, I mean, yes, it means something, but it's not quite the binding agreement that it once was.
And I'm totally with you on the end of July, completely. Because look, you're right. I think a lot of them want to enjoy their senior season in part and feel like they have that part all settled. And that's why they have the first Wednesday in February if you're not inclined to make up your mind. So I'm completely with you on that. The settlement with House, we don't know how it's going to play out in the end. But it sounds like the negotiations are 22% of your revenue or $20 million, whichever one is lower. And can this go a long way towards settling that recruiting part down a bit and having guys making commitments?
I think so. It gives everybody a baseline, and as I think you talked about it before, the Big Ten, the SEC are going to be out ahead of everything. Like this is where the sport has headed, and as the conferences get bigger, that sort of makes more sense. But it gives everybody a baseline to work with. And it takes just takes everything off of the fans that are being asked to foot the bill. And I think that's the crazy thing is you look at this system, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like you're asking donors and everything to write these checks and everything like that. That's a tough ask because you're asking them for facilities, you're asking them for scholarship dollars, you're asking them for all these different things. And I don't think anybody likes the system. It's about who's making the most of the system. And right now, it's been a struggle for Penn State to sort of get the bigger fish across the line, get the things, I wouldn't call it luxury spending, but to keep up with the Ohio States, to keep up with the Alabamas, and actually Alabama's probably a bad example, but to keep up with some of these programs that are able to, pull in these big chunks. I think that's really what you're looking at right now. And if everybody's got a starting point, and yes, everyone has the same starting point now, which is 0, but a nice little buffer would go a long way for a lot of programs. And also, I think it would take out that, I don't want to call it pay for play. We'll just call it pay for play because we're here.
Sure.
But you take out some of the negotiating power. You take away the ability for some of these recruitments to get out of hand, I think. And I think that Penn State has done a really good job sticking to their guns. I mean, some of that is necessary because of the budget they have, but some of it is, hey, we're not going to go crazy and buy transfers, not going to go crazy and pay a high school kid who hasn't played it down in college football an exorbitant amount of money. And yes, that's going to lose you some recruits, but at the same time, it's also going to help you out on the back end because you're a developmental program. You're a program that's done really, really well in the NFL draft, and people see that. So a long-winded answer to a short question, yes, I think that's something that could really help Penn State.
I mean, look, I know the NIL dollars are out there. Everybody knows it. When I was at Ohio State for basketball, the weekend Downs committed from Alabama to Ohio State, and I was told indirectly what the number was. It wasn't small. When you talk to recruits, Sean, how often is NIL brought up with the people you talk with?
It's probably less than people think, but then again, you spend most of that recruitment it's doing visits, doing everything that everyone did 5-10 years ago, and that's fine. But NIL has become the chip, the bargaining chip at the end. So you could have great relationships. You could have a kid on campus 10 times. That's all great. But at the end of the day, if you go in there at the end of their recruitment and somebody comes in and swoops in with a big bag of money, what do you do? I mean, that's the big thing that I'm looking at, and that's kind of what's made it a little bit more difficult to cover is, hey, Penn State can do everything right with a kid. But at the end of the day, if that bag is bigger somewhere else, that can make a difference. And I think I see it more as a tiebreaker, really. It can be like a lot of the old things, like people say this is killing the sport and everything like that. A lot of the old things is still a prevalent part of college football. A lot of these old things are still sticking around. A lot of the culture is still sticking around, but, you're just going about it a different way. But that tiebreaker, if somebody's throwing you a bag, if somebody is making it, impossible to say no, because this is life-changing money to a lot of these guys that have never touched it, and their families have never touched it. And I'm a proponent of athletes getting what they can get, but if that tiebreaker comes through and it's not on your end, that's going to be tough to stomach. And then what do? You go back to your donors and you say, this is why we lost and all this stuff. And it's just a big cycle of, I don't even know the word that I would go with it, but it's just a big cycle of disappointment, and then trying to turn that into dollars, and just that wheel just keeps turning.
Part of the wheel turning of those who transferred out of Penn State. I think you're not going to be surprised to hear me say I wasn't surprised by the ones that transferred out, except for one, and that was King Mack. He ended up going to Alabama. What was your read on that when you finally, because you're the one that put the story out about it?
Yeah, that was a tough one because, like I said, all these things are still in place from college football, and playing time was there. Opportunity was there. This is a kid that was going to be the fourth safety in a three safety look. So, Guy gets a stinger. Guy has to come out for a while. That's a great opportunity in a defense that you seemingly know. So, like from a football perspective, it's a tough read. Now, there's a lot that goes into it. This is a kid from South Florida, so South Florida, the Wild West in terms of recruiting, and there's a lot that goes along with that. But I think that was the surprising thing, because we had heard whispers in April about him being a potential, I guess you can call him a poaching candidate or something like that. And it's just like, okay, well, maybe he can work through it, maybe he can get it. And then all of a sudden he hits the portal on the last day. And I agree with you. The other guys that left, no real big surprises in there. You never know what was going to happen with Keandre, but that's kind of been the story for the last couple of years. So, but yeah, this one was the one that stings, because not only do you go into the summer with a huge hole in the back of your, in the fourth spot of your your safety spots, but also, like, how does this change recruiting South Florida? How does this change, just going out of the region? Because, that distance matters, and these other things matter to a lot of different people. And I just had a tough time wrapping my head around that one myself, because I think he's going to be a really good player. And if you look at it, at Alabama, I'm sure he's got a similar opportunity. I don't know the depth chart. I don't know the situation there. But if he has the same opportunity, a defense that he has to relearn, he's got the same opportunity. I just, from a football perspective, that one was a head scratcher.
Sean, the great respect I have for your work and what you do. What is it about this job that drives you and intrigues you when you're covering something 365?
Man, that's a very good question. And it's like, it's always fun to learn the stories, tell the stories, meet the people, know the people. I think I've been very lucky. I started covering this in 2006 under Joe Paterno, and then Bill O'Brien came through, and that was a trip. And then James comes in and really brings with him the stability that just doesn't happen anymore. So a lot of these people, known a lot of these people since he got here. And it's been incredible to be around the people. But from a perspective of covering it, staying ahead of news, breaking news, there's really nothing like it. But the recruiting doesn't get boring to me. The names change, the stories change somewhat, but there's always something to talk about. And we're grateful for the people at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com and on 3 that want to follow it year round. Because this is a year-round sport. You get games 4 months a year, but this is a year-round sport. So we really appreciate the people that follow us, and really appreciate the people that interact. I think that's what keeps us going. It's just the interaction with the community. It's really fun, man. And like I said, when people ask about my job, I get paid to watch football. It doesn't get much better than that. I work from home. It does not get much better than that. So I love it. I still get up every morning and I get to work I don't have to work. I get to work, and I think that's a very big thing, especially with the change to go to on-3.
Yeah, and believe me, you're preaching to the choir on that. I get to sit there on Saturdays with Jack Hammond and talk about football. Wow, pretty good.
Unbelievable.
Pretty good life. Hey, one final one I want to bring up, and it actually circles back to the King Mac discussion. You talked about South Florida. Pennsylvania goes in cycles. So the old days of putting the protractor down and drawing a 500-mile circle around State College, you have to go where the talent is. So what kind of process is that for this staff to go distances to get guys and convince them that Penn State is the one?
It all starts with that recruiting staff. Now, you obviously know the assistants. Terry Smith does a wonderful job. Jaywan Sider, down in South Florida, does a wonderful job. But Andy Frank, Kenny Sanders, Alan Samitis, Chris Mann, just the guys that do the heavy lifting that you don't see are what put Penn State in that position to not only identify, because it's one of the best staffs at identifying talent nationally, but not only identify, but forge those relationships for essentially the closers. And James Franklin was a really good recruiting head coach to come in and do. So this is a top to bottom staff effort. And those guys on the recruiting staff, man, I know Kenny Sanders just had twins about a year ago. Yep. I cannot imagine the hours that those guys work, and on top of that, having twins. Oh boy! So yeah, it's about the work, and it's about the effort that those guys put in.
Sean, great respect for the work you do, and I really appreciate the time you gave us today, because most of the year is so busy for you, and I'm glad you could carve out a couple of minutes for us today.
And I'm glad I did not fall asleep on the chair watching golf. So I appreciate the wake-up call, and we'll talk to you soon. Steve, thanks for having me on.
John, thanks so much.
The big signing, obviously, but they also got Bryce Huff from the Jets, who's a promising young player, and then they went into the draft with very specific needs, and boy, they addressed them in a big way. And, Howie Roseman did what he always likes to do, which is move up and down the board, wheel and deal. And he came out of it with what I thought were some really good players, and also added like 3 draft picks for next year. I mean, it's really, I mean, he is he's a master of playing the draft board. He really is. And, listen, some years are better than others. I mean, there's some years that he wheels and deals and comes away with Jalen Reagor.
Right, exactly.
And then there are other years where he does the same thing and he winds up making a big trade and he gets Devontae Smith. So nobody's perfect in this business, but he's better than most. And I thought this was really one of his best drafts.
We are in an era where people want to see, Ray, everything right away now. Let's get success. Allowing something to play out doesn't seem to be the norm, but how important is it to keep the perspective, at least I do, of you need a couple of years to really figure out whether it really was a good draft or not?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, that's very true. And the point that you make about the fans don't want to hear about, this is going to be a really good. We need 2-3 years to evaluate this player. There is a lot of truth in that. I mean, coaches will tell you there is a lot of truth in that. But the fact of the matter is, the Eagles are a good team with very specific immediate needs, and so this draft had to have that. In this draft, it's fine to go draft a developmental kind of player like Hunt, who they got with their third pick. Yeah. But right now, you need guys that can line up and play and keep you in the mix for, maybe winning the conference, maybe going to a Super Bowl. This is a team that was 10-1 mid-season last year, and then fell off a cliff the second half of the year because they couldn't stop anybody, and they had the worst secondary in the league by the end of the year. Well, you still got a lot of those good players on offense, and you've added to it with Barkley. But you're not going to go anywhere unless you improve your defense. So that's what the Eagles did in this draft. And they drafted with the idea that we got to get better in that area, like right now, to maximize the prime of our offensive players, and they have a lot of good ones. But we're not going to be a serious contender if we run out the same defense that we had at the end of last year. We got to get better, like right away. And I think they did that. Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean are are my 1-2 cornerbacks in the draft, and the Eagles came away with both of them. Now, if you had told me the day before the draft or the morning of the draft that they were going to be able to pull that off, I would have said no way. If they get one of them, that's a coup. To get both of them, I mean, I thought it was pretty amazing. I think those are two guys that are going to come in, and I think they're both going to be starting week 1.
And watch Cooper return punts too. Obviously, I've done enough Penn State Iowa games in my career. The guy's a player. I mean, I thought that was a second-round steal. Also, the one area where Howie didn't have to make a move was actually in the first round, because the first 14 players were chosen were offensive players. So the player he needed fell to him, which is also part of the art of the draft as well. What did you think about the offensive trend in the first half of the draft?
Well, you're right. This worked out perfectly for the Eagles. This worked out perfectly for the Eagles, because we all knew well ahead of time before the draft that the way the things were going to play out. I mean, the early part of the draft was going to be all about the quarterbacks, and then the next big run was going to be on wide receivers, and then the next big run was going to be on offensive tackles. And frankly, none of those were areas where the Eagles needed to get involved. So they could let all of the teams that needed that go big game hunting there for the first dozen picks or so. And the whole time that they're doing that, and everybody's getting all around the country is getting all excited watching TV, watching all these quarterbacks come off the board, the Eagles are just sitting there saying, man, this is great for us. Because every defensive player on the board is getting pushed further and further down and getting closer and closer to us. Now, I think we all kind of fully foresaw that. But I still thought if Quinyon Mitchell was the guy they were targeting, and I don't know if apparently he was. I didn't talk to Howie, or Howie was certain never told me, but I thought he was the best corner. And if the Eagles were thinking about drafting him, even the fact that all of these defensive players are getting pushed further and further down the board, I never thought that he was going to get to 22. Never, ever. So if he was their guy, I thought, okay, what Howie's probably going to have to do here is, he's going to have to take one of those second-round picks that he's got, package it with 22, and move up to, say, 13, 14 to get Mitchell. If that's who he really wants, he's not going to get him sitting at 22. Well, he did.
Yeah.
He did. Mitchell falls to 22, so he gets him at 22, and now he's in a position in the second round where he can package those two second-round picks and trade up high enough to get Didinger. And I know you saw a lot of Didinger in the Big Ten. Yeah. But I mean, to me, I think he's a real quality player with tremendous versatility. I think he will be an immediate hit with Vic Fangio and his defense, the way he likes to move people around and play them in multiple roles. I mean, that's exactly what Didinger is. Yeah. And if it had worked out that if they had gotten Didinger at 22,
yes.
Let's say Mitchell had been off the board. Let's say somebody had jumped ahead of the Eagles and gotten Mitchell. Okay, that would have been a blow. But if they had come away at 22 with Didinger, I would have said, hey, that's great. I would have been happy with him at 22. But to get Mitchell at 22 and Didinger at 40, I mean, that was really, I mean, a little bit of luck. But I got to give Howie a lot of credit. I think he played it just right.
I didn't see him play in person. I only saw him practice one time. And that's Will Shipley from Clemson. And I thought the value of that pick, that stuck out to me on a positive side. What did you think of that pick?
I liked it. I thought they had a need there. I thought there were two offensive needs. Well, maybe more than that. But there were a couple of offensive needs that they felt they had to address. One was a backup running back, kind of a utility guy. Yep. Saquon's going to be the guy. I mean, Saquon's going to get the bulk of the work, and he should. But they weren't going. It was pretty clear they weren't bringing Boston Scott back. Kenneth Gainwell, who's been here for a couple of years, I mean, he's okay, but that's about all he is. But they needed another guy, a guy that could come in and spell Barkley and become a bit of a third down threat, and a guy that could do multiple things. And I thought Shipley could give them that. So I thought he was a good fit there. And the other thing that they needed was they really needed a slot receiver. Yeah. I mean, they've got the two outstanding wide receivers in Smith and Brown. I mean, that might be the best pair in all of the NFL. I think those two together.
Agreed.
But they really didn't have. They like to play 11 personnel a lot. One running back, one tight end, three wide receivers. That's Sirianni. His playbook leans heavily that way. Well, okay, if you're going to play 11 personnel, then that third receiver, you need a third receiver who can really contribute in the slot. And they were hoping that Quez Watkins would be that guy, but they gave him a full chance at it. It just didn't work out. So that was one other thing you were looking for in the draft. And there were some good slot receivers in this draft. There really were. Now, the kid that they took from Texas A&M, Smith, is he's had sort of a truncated career at Texas A&M. He's had a lot of injuries. He's kind of been in and out. Every time he starts to play really well, something sets him back. But he's got a lot of ability, and we'll see how well he adjusts to the NFL. But those were two needs that they had, and I feel confident that Shipley can be a guy that can contribute right away. Mm-hmm. And Smith, they're hoping he will, but he might need a little more time.
Okay, so we say how the draft is today. It's gone to Philadelphia. It was wild, tremendous, raucous. Now it was Detroit, where they had several 100,000 eventually watching over 3 days. Do you remember covering your first draft as a reporter, and what was it like?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It was 1970. Yep. And I was a 23-year-old, just new on the pro football beat, covering the Eagles. And the NFL draft was nothing. It was nothing. We had the Eagles did it, and they ran the draft out of the press room. In 1970 they weren't even in Vet Stadium yet. They were doing it from the team's headquarters, their offices, which were in the Philadelphia Bulletin building. I was working for the Philadelphia Bulletin, and the Eagles had the entire first floor. So they were doing the draft. The Eagles were literally drafting out of my building in 1970, and it was all the media, and it wasn't that much. It was maybe a dozen guys. We were all gathered in one kind of room that was about the size of a closet, and there was no TV coverage, obviously, and so we just sat there, and every 2 hours or 3 hours, the team's PR guy would walk into the room and say, okay, in the third round, we just drafted so-and-so. And he would come in and he would distribute like one mimeograph sheet of information on that guy. And that was it, and okay, I'll be back and I'll see you in 4 hours when we pick again. That was the draft. And the story, your story would, you might make the first page of sports, you might not. But most of it was just the agate stuff that ran along with the baseball box scores, like all these names in little type that nobody paid much attention and nobody really cared. When ESPN was launched at the end of the 70s, and they decided that we're going to televise the NFL draft, that changed everything. Yeah. That changed everything, and that spawned the whole Mel Kiper phenomenon, and then all of the people that wanted to be Mel Kiper, and then all the draft publications, and it became this thing that it is now, which I look at it and I just marvel. People talk about how the Super Bowl has grown, and it has. Super Bowl has grown ridiculously. But I always say that Super Bowl's nothing compared to the way the NFL draft has grown. Right. You started with something that literally nobody paid any attention to something that pulls in ridiculous numbers on TV on multiple networks. It is an amazing thing, but that's the NFL. They are the master marketers of sports. They're the master marketers of anything, to be honest with you. They have structured everything in their world so perfectly that they never are out of the news cycle. You have the football season is what it is. It goes through. Then you have the postseason, which takes you up to the Super Bowl. Then you have your post-Super Bowl where everybody's just talking about the game and the TV ratings and stuff. And then within 1 week, it's free agency. So free agency dominates the whole conversation for the next month. Yep. And then you're right into the pre-draft. It's the combines, it's the pro days. Then you go to the draft. Then you go into mini camps, and then the OTAs. and that's the offseason. Then there's the release of the schedule. Oh my God, more primetime programming, and they're going to release the schedule, and then they're at training camp, and then they're into the season. I mean, it is just so amazing, and it hasn't happened by accident. I mean, it's been very well planned by the people on Park Avenue. But to compare the NFL of today with what I started covering in 1970, I mean, to me, I stand back and I just look at it and marvel.
Well, you would have loved to have been sitting next to me on the defensive team bus going to a Peach Bowl practice, and Jack Ham is sitting there, and he's talking to the defensive players about what the draft was like in his era. And he said, I played in a couple All-Star games, and then a couple weeks later they had the draft, and they found out. And they looked at him, and they were like, well, what do you mean? What about the combine? He said, there was no combine. What about pro day? There was no pro day. And they're looking at him like, you have to be kidding me. Like, that's impossible. And they have taken something where they hand a card and read a name and turned it into millions watching it.
Yeah, I know. Well, Steve, that's a funny story about Jack. And, I remember the Eagles had a scout that really loved Jack Ham. I mean, he had scouted him at Penn State and loved him. And he was really pounding on the desk with the coaches to take Jack Ham when Jack came out, and the Eagles passed on him. And he was just furious. I mean, he came into the room where the reporters were, where we were, and just was livid. And because he had been telling us all during the season how he loved Jack Ham. And he said, I was just pounding on the table in there for Jack Ham. He said, and they wouldn't take him. They said he's too small. And he said, that guy's going to be a great player. Well, he sure was right. Yeah. But the story I was going to tell you was Ron Jaworski tells a great story about the day he was drafted. He was in the dormitory at Youngstown State. He didn't even know the draft was going on. So he's in his dorm room with his roommate, and there's one payphone at the end of the hall, and the phone rings, and this exchange student from Belgium picks it up and answers the phone and hollers down the hall. He said, "Who? Huh? Who calling? Okay, wait." And he, puts his hand over the phone and hollers, Jaworski, Los Angeles Rams on the phone. And Ronnie jumps out of the bed, goes sprinting down the hall, and gets the phone, and and sure enough, it's Jack Faulkner calling from the Rams to tell Jaws that he was their second round draft pick. But I mean, it was such an incidental kind of thing, and he didn't even know the draft was happening that day. So now you compare that to what you have now. What did they have? 200,000 people attending the draft. Yeah. I mean, it's you look at it now, and I just shake my head. It's just hard. And all the guys from that time, all the guys that actually remember what it was like back in the day, like Jack Ham, like Ron Jaworski. I mean, they're just as amazed as you and I are.
Well, and Bud Tallman, and of course you know Bud from all those years he was with the Bills in the NFL. And of course, Bud worked here at Penn State for a long time. The Bills draft Ahmad Rashad. Well, they have to call him. So they call him. And this woman answers. They say, is Ahmad there? And she says, what? Who? Ahmad. Ahmad? She says, Ahmad Rashad. And she finally says, oh, for goodness sakes. Bobby, get over here. It was his mother. Right? Bobby Moore was his name.
He was Bobby Moore then, right? Yep. Exactly.
I said, who? Mom didn't know who it was.
I remember 1971 in the 7th round, and you're getting down in the draft, and the Eagles were not a good team, and the 7th round, who cares? And the PR guy, Jimmy Gallagher, comes walking into this little room where we're all cooped up waiting for the press release. And he comes in and he says, okay, we just made our 7th round pick. It's a wide receiver from Southern University. His name's Harold Carmichael. And he hands out this little mimeograph sheet with about 5 lines of information on it. And I look at it and I say, hey, Jimmy, I said, there's a mistake here. He says, what do you mean? I said, you've got him down as 6'8". There are no 6'8" wide receivers. And he said, Yeah, I know. I don't. He said, but we called and we checked at the university. I called Southern, and they said, yeah, the guy's really 6'8". Now, I mean, who knows? Maybe he's not. Maybe they're lying. But that's what they told us. It's not a typo. That's what they told me. So, I mean, that was how little we knew about Harold Carmichael.
Oh, goodness. You and I could go around on this for a long time. This is a lot. That's a lot of fun. Ray, thanks so much. I always appreciate every minute I spend with you. Thanks so much.
It's always a pleasure, Steve. Call me anytime.
You bet. Thanks.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.